Hello everybody and welcome to this video, another installment of the Chess Master Games series. This game was played in 1920 between Marchand, who was white, and Maroczy, who was black, in the Amsterdam tournament. So the beginning of this game goes e4 and Maroczy responds with e6, so we have a French defence, d4, d5, and a lot of the lines are very complicated, but here white just took and black recaptured. So this is the French defence exchange variation, or the exchange French, and this has a reputation for being a very boring, drawish opening. And this is partly why. White has a very simple plan, as does black. Bishop d3, bishop d6. And here, white could try playing knight e2 and then bishop f4, because the white bishop on c1 is going to have a hard time finding somewhere useful to be, so exchanging it off might not be a bad idea. Instead, knight f3 was played, knight f6, and castles. Okay, so the position so far has been a mirror at the moment, with white only having a minimal advantage due to the first move. So bishop g5 is played, which is a good move. It pins the knight, and there's often a maneuver where white can play the bishop to h4 and then to g3, and from there can exchange off dark squared bishops. So black does the same thing, bishop g4, and here there's a few options for white. One of them, which isn't very good, is knight c3. This move isn't seen very much because, to be honest, it's not a very good move. Black can play c6. Now, this is a good response from black, or from white if the black knight was on c6. The thing is that white's knight is restricted by the black pawns, especially the one on c6. As you can see, it can't go to b5 or d5, or even e4. So the pawn on c6 is successfully shutting out white's knight, and is stronger than white's knight. So bear that in mind in some of your future games. If white can play knight c3, you might be able to cut down the options with with pawn c6. So white doesn't play knight c3. Instead, white wants to play knight b d2, and if I was white, I would just play it here, but instead c3 was played. Black now plays knight b d7. So a potential idea is to play rook e8, and then play knight f8, and then knight to usually g6, but sometimes e6. And that way you've managed to transfer the knight over to the king's side, where most of the action happens. White plays knight b d2, and black now, instead of playing rook e8, plays c6. So again, we have an identical position, and white connects the rooks with queen c2. It's a very, general principled move. So there's also a threat here of bishop takes h7. So setting up a simple threat like that can be effective, as black might have been sent to sleep, as the knight on f6 can't recapture due to the queen on d8 being attacked by the bishop. So rook e8 would be a mistake. Queen c7 is instead played. And now we have rook f to e1. Rook f e8. And here I would continue on with the plan of knight to f1 and then to g3. That would be my way of playing this position. As you can see, it's already very level, and it's quite difficult for white to gain an advantage. A rather more weird idea is playing b4 and then knight b3 to c5, but that's not generally a good idea due to white's pawn structure suffering. So h3 is played, which I don't like because, okay, black could take the knight and then white would recapture with the knight and would then have the two bishops. But black can just do the simple rerouting maneuver, bishop h5, and the bishop is heading to g6. So here what I would do is play knight h4, bishop g6, and then occupy the king side with knight f5. So now black can't exchange off light squared bishops. The knight on f5 can be a bit annoying for black, and it's threatening to take off black's good bishop on d6. So there's a lot of potential here for perhaps white to try and win a very slow maneuvering game. Perhaps rook takes e1, and rook e8 could be played. So although this wouldn't deal with the knight takes bishop on d6 problem, what black would be doing is exchanging off rooks. Rook takes e8 is the most expedient move. Knight takes e8 and perhaps knight f3 first. The thing is, though, that with so few pieces left on the board and an identical pawn structure, black is unlikely to lose this game. This is almost certainly drawn. So after a move like knight f6, knight takes, white again could take on f6, but double pawns aren't a big deal. Knight e5, bishop takes, queen takes, knight f to e4. So, okay, there's a small threat of f6, but after a move like bishop f4, I would be very reluctant to play on for either side. It just looks like this is going to be a draw. So I prefer just to go home at this point. There's no point really playing on. After, say, queen e7, there's queen e2, and again, just everything's going to come off the board. There's going to be a lot of exchanges. So going back, after h3, bishop h5, knight h4 was not played. Instead, rook takes e8 and rook takes e8. So here I don't like that move because black now has the rook on the open file. So if white is actually trying to win this, then you've released tension too early, and white's rook is a lot less active than black's. And with everything else being equal, that must mean that black has a tiny advantage here. Rook e1 was now played, and bishop g6. So black has succeeded in maneuvering the bishop. Rook takes e8, check. Knight takes e8. I think the reason for this is that white actually is not trying to win. White's just trying to draw. Perhaps white was a little afraid of Maroczy and had chosen this opening precisely to get a drawn position very early. So knight h4 is now played, which is less effective due to knight f8. Knight takes g6. Pawn takes g6. I would have played knight takes, but that's just me. Knight e6 can be played next move. Knight f3 and queen d7. Queen e2, seizing the open file. Queen e6. King f1. Queen takes. King takes. And knight e6. So if we look at the position here, white does have the two bishops, and black has a very slight problem with pawn structure just because of double pawns. and white's king is more central and therefore active. Yet with all these pluses, there isn't really any way for white to gain an advantage. Firstly, the pawn structure isn't really a big problem. Black can just not move any of the pawns, and I don't see how white would win them or exploit the pawn structure. Secondly, the king being slightly more active might be the biggest single advantage white has, but black easily has enough time to play king to f8 to e7 to e6. And even if white gets the king to f4, then I still don't see any way that white would win a king and pawn endgame. And finally, the two bishop advantage. One, isn't that important in this closed central position. And two, after white puts the bishop back, black can simply regain, take away white's bishop pair with knight f4 check. And indeed, after bishop takes, which is the only move, and bishop takes, a draw was agreed here. Again, the pawn structure, the king position is negligible, it's fine. And the two bishops as well are on opposite colours, so as though as though everything else wasn't indicative of a draw being the result, having opposite coloured bishops as well makes a draw even more likely. And I think the move I would play for white would just be knight to d2 or king d1 to c2. And I think each side can just sit there and not move any of the pieces around too much. Just leave the king on c2 and d7 respectively, and then perhaps just shuffle the pieces back and forth, and neither side can really make any progress. So I partly wanted to show this game because I haven't shown any draws yet, and I thought this is sort of quite good in the sense that if you're playing a higher rated player and you want to draw, or if you're in a tournament or playing in a team match and you need a draw to win the match, or you need a draw to ensure you do well in the tournament in terms of the standing, you can often do something to really aid you, which is just pick a symmetrical pawn structure. And as long as you have a simple plan, like white does here, which is the natural plan to do, sometimes, even if your opponent is 200 or 300 points FIDE higher rated than you, they still might not be able to get anything out of this. So anyway, that is the reason for this video, how to get draws against high-rated players, or just if you're not feeling in the mood as well. You could simply play 20 moves and then agree a draw. So comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.